Okay, so the car we're driving here today is a 2006 Jaguar XK convertible. They also did the coupe version, introduced in 2006, so this is one of the very first of the line. And I know what some of you will be thinking, it's not quite a classic, but the first versions are nearly 15 years old as we speak. And I do think it was the finest evolution of Jaguar's sporting Grand Tourer line. So let's pop in, have a drive and see what we think. I want to take your minds back to 2005. Jaguar had a tumultuous year or so. Their foray into Formula One hadn't proved particularly successful, and they withdrew at the end of the 2004 season and sold the team. And on top of that, they'd also announced the closure of their iconic Coventry factory, Browns Lane. So come 2005, they really needed some good news. They introduced a concept car, the ALC, a stylish aluminium coupe. What it really was the car we're in now, a Jaguar XK, but made to look more like a concept car and to promote the lightweight aluminium credentials. When the new XK did come out in 2006, boy oh boy, it was worth the wait. It was the first sporting car that Ian Callum could get his hands on. He joined in 2000, so 6 years on, it felt like a long time to wait to get his penmanship on a Jaguar sports car, but here it was. And what a gorgeous thing it is. It's got such pure, elegant lines, classy, sophisticated, no fussiness with any of the lines, and the proportions are excellent. The car looks good, I think, almost from any angle. So I really like the styling of the X150 XK. I think it's one of Ian Callum's finest bits of work. It's got a purity of form that I think has stood the test of time really well. Just look at these muscular haunches here that rise over these lovely alloy wheels. These are 19-inch wheels. They did also do 18s, but they don't fill the arches quite as well. And of course you can go for the real hot rod look with the 20-inch wheels. New pedestrian impact legislation had been introduced, which meant that there had to be a gap between the bonnet line and the engine beneath. So Jaguar came up with quite an ingenious idea here. There's actually a sort of hydraulic ram underneath this bonnet here, which in the event of a pedestrian impact will force the bonnet up and therefore create the requisite gap between the bonnet and the engine. And that's how they get away with such a low swooping bonnet line. Comes round to these lovely sort of elegant headlights. The headlight design was updated throughout the car's life. Now Callum was really nervous about the sort of overall proportions of the back of the car, and folding steel roof cars, when you look at them, they've got quite a large derriere, and that's because they've got to fit all this folding metalwork. So instead they opted still for the fabric hood, and I think what that's managed to do is give it much more elegant proportions. If we then just open the boot, you'll see one of the challenges you've got is that this is a much smaller boot than the X100 that it replaced, and this here is to then act as a sort of barrier for when the roof is down. Much to the Jaguar engineers' frustrations, they couldn't quite do away with the electric aerial at the early cars. It was deleted by about the 2008 model year, but for early cars it had to make do with this rather unsightly electric aerial. I think they just couldn't get the in-screen aerials working properly, particularly for long-range reception in markets like North America. So that's certainly the sign of an early car, but overall you just can't deny that the proportions, the elegance of the X150, I just think they're superb, and the lines have aged really well. It's an all-new aluminium body and a brand new chassis replacing the X100, a car that in itself was based on the XJS, so all of its underpinnings go back to the mid-70s. So this 2006 design was all new. The 4.2 V8 engine was carried over from the last of the line X100s, but that's no bad thing because it was a formidable power plant. 300 horsepower in normally aspirated guys, 400 in supercharged guys. Being made of aluminium, of course, it's tremendously lightweight, but also very rigid and strong. And that means it's got this great torsional rigidity that the previous car didn't have. This being the convertible, it's more rigid than the previous generation coupe. It does mean that the ride and handling is, I think, even better. The packaging inside is also better. There's more space in here than the X100 that it replaced. The XK feels so poised and nimble. You'd never feel it was such a big car. Like on the road, you just feel so agile. Oh, yeah, that's good, isn't it? It's not too loutish, but it's just a lovely visceral roar. I seem to remember when the car was introduced, there was murmurings that management weren't a fan of the interior. They said that the interior was too dull. However, it all works and it's beautifully trimmed. Ergonomically, it works well. I'm not a great fan of the wood. Everyone's got their own personal opinion. This is the traditional burr walnut finish, but my preferred option would be the aluminium effect inserts. I think they look far sportier and reminiscent of early E-types. It's a 6-speed auto box in the early cars. It did step up to an 8-speed box in later life, but again, allegedly sealed for life, but the manufacturer ZF recommended fluid changes, I think every 50,000 miles, but the gear change is smooth and it's effortless. It just means it's a refined cruiser when it wants to be, and it can be a nimble, agile sports car when it wants to be as well. So the car continued to develop over time. The 4.2 litre engine was upgraded to the 5 litre. There were some styling changes for the 2011 model year car, with changes to the front bumper, slight changes to the rear tail lights and tail pipes, but it was all very subtle and the overall shape stayed largely as it was. The real tragedy of the XK is that I don't think it enjoyed the popularity that it deserved. It was critically a much better car than anything that had been before it, but it suffered from the plight of a global economy that was in meltdown come the end of the noughties. Jaguar also introduced the F-Type come 2013, and for management at least, that rendered the XK largely superfluous, so they axed it by 2015, which I think is a shame, because I think there was room in the market for both. The XK was sporty, sure, but it had a softer edge which made it that grand tourer that it was always intended to be, whereas the F-Type was a harder sporting machine. This is technically a 2+2. It's got seats in the back, although, you know, anyone with legs is probably going to struggle in the back there, to be honest. So from what I gather, a lot of the things to look out for are all the standard wear and tear things. Suspension bushes, they'll produce knocks and rattles if they're worn. Electronics is really the thing. A low battery will throw all sorts of errors and engine management warnings up and things like that are often cleared by simply replacing the battery. But the thing to remember about these X150s is that the prices are just so tempting right now. Early examples now you can pick up for £6,000–7,000 for a fairly leggy coupe, maybe a bit more for a convertible, but what a car for that money. And as long as you don't go into it assuming that it's going to cost you 50 quid a year to maintain, you won't be disappointed. This 06 convertible that we're in now, I think, is up for 16,995, which is just, I think, scandalously good value considering what you're getting. A British-made aluminium sports convertible V8 for less than the price of a Mini or something. I mean, it's just insane. But quite frankly, whether you go for the normally aspirated V8 or top-of-the-range screaming XK RS, the Jaguar XK is such a well-honed package by the time you get to this X150 generation. Yes, for some taste they're still a bit modern right now, but mark my words, these Jaguar XKs are a classic in the making.